Hello. To begin with, I would like to give thanks for this precious opportunity to address you. The introductory quote opens the topic, which is how to answer adequately as Church the situation of the world today, which is critically endangered by extinction of species, climate change and desertification. In his inaugural homily, Pope Benedict XVI said, "And there are so many kinds of desert. There is the desert of poverty, the desert of hunger and thirst, the desert of abandonment, of loneliness, of destroyed love. There is the desert of God's darkness, the emptiness of souls no longer aware of their dignity or the goal of human life. The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. Therefore, the earth's treasures no longer serve to build God's garden for all to live in, but they have been made to serve the powers of exploitation and destruction." So Benedict XVI is saying here that there is a very close connection between the internal spiritual situation of human beings and the state of the external natural world. He's even saying that damage and degradation that happens to the external world is a direct consequence of what happens in human minds and hearts. And the natural world is in an alarmingly critical state, as interdisciplinary research is showing with increasing clarity. According to the Living Planet report of 2018, published by the World Wildlife Fund, 60% of wildlife vertebrates have been lost over the past 50 years. Some of the methods used by the World Wildlife Fund to quantify data may be doubtful, but the reports clearly show the trend, which is a critical loss of species and diversity. The world in which we live is also getting dangerously warm. The report of the International Panel on Climate Change, released in October 2018, says that human activities have already caused approximately 1 degree centigrade of global warming above pre-industrial levels, and unless the contemporary ways of production and lifestyle change dramatically, the warming will continue. Even now, with global warming of 1 degree, ocean levels are rising, so that some island nations are already now facing a critical threat and loss of living space. But if the ways people live on Earth change quickly, it may be possible to prevent further threats and degradation. Adaptation is already occurring in different parts of the world and at different levels. The city of Manchester has pledged to completely phase out fossil fuels within 20 years and to produce no further emissions from burning them. One part of the city of Prague sets up community composters for its citizens, which significantly reduces emissions of methane from landfills. Arnold Schwarzenegger completely gave up eating meat because switching to a plant-based diet is the single most significant way in which an individual can reduce her carbon footprint. Christians can join in all that as individuals and as members of government and non-government subjects influencing the policies of towns, regions and states. But what can Christians do as Church? Pope Francis in the Laudato Si encyclical points out that the Christianity of someone who believes in Jesus, trusts in God and loves his neighbor but takes no interest in how her behavior influences the natural world is somehow incomplete. This aspect of the ecological conversion has been well described. Books and articles have been published that encourage Christians to develop their personal relationship to nature and to engage in individual moderation and simplicity of life. That is good and useful, but it is merely an incremental form of adaptation, not adaptation by transformation. And it is also fundamentally insufficient because species extinction, climate change and desertification do not pose a threat to individuals, but to communities, to whole nations, and as such present a tremendous social problem. And the Laudato Si encyclical says in paragraph 219 that social problems ought to be addressed by means of community networks and not merely by the sum of individual good deeds. And in fact, community networks of various kinds aiming to address the situation are being created. Since the last report of the International Panel on Climate Change was published in October, many different voices are sounding through the world calling for system changes that would enable a fast transition to clean energy sources. If the laws of the member states of the Paris Agreement do not contribute to reducing emissions, their citizens feel obliged to resolutely demand it. In Australia, school children were striking in several places in November because they realized that at stake is their adult life, their chance to live their lives in a livable world. And they demand the government to take measures to mitigate the impact of climate change and not to burn fossil fuels, and further aggravate it. In London, several large demonstrations took place in November 2018, including blockading major bridges, which the participants see as a means of making others listen to them. They are imprisoned and say that they are less afraid of going to prison than of their children's future. And they say that whenever something changed for the better in history, women got the vote or the human rights of African Americans were acknowledged, it was because people were not afraid of the existing system and changed it. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. transgressed segregation laws and was punished for it until the segregation was abolished and he became a human rights icon and moral paragon. Many important achievements have been reached by citizen pressure. Whether it is possible to change the global socio-economic system soon enough to limit global warming below that critical 1.5 degrees, I don't know. But I do know that even if the socio-economic system is changed in time, the true causes of the environmental crisis in human hearts will remain, as the introductory quote pointed out. These are poignantly expressed by a statement attributed to the American environmentalist lawyer Gus Speth, who said that he used to think science could address environmental problems, but later came to see that they were in fact spiritual concerns. Christianity offers a way to address these problems. It is called penance, confession of sins. It is insufficiently used, and the Laudato Si encyclical says in paragraph 218 that to achieve reconciliation with creation, we must examine our lives and acknowledge the ways in which we have harmed God's creation through our actions and our failure to act. So it must be a conversion of the heart and at the same time a community conversion. But there has not been much experience with community penance and community conversion. Since the auricular confession was introduced in the 7th century, we have got used to understanding penance and confession of sins as an individual achievement, or at best as a personal gift. Its community dimension is little appreciated, and there are even no standard procedures for it outside of religious orders. But we do not stand alone before God, even though it may appear so in the confessional. And we do not stand before Him only with those who are round the altar with us, or those who celebrate Mass in other parts of the world. We stand before God in the community of saints who fasted, and also in the community of generations and generations of baptized and unbaptized persons who gradually brought the world that was created beautiful by God into the impoverished state it is in now. We have a better opportunity to see that today than they did, and we can, through Jesus who died and rose, do penance for them as well. That is why in Prague, Czech Republic, we set up a Laudato Si circle in which we focus on recultivating the spiritual landscape, on attaining reconciliation with creation through community conversion and penance. And we trust that Pope Benedict was right, and that by addressing spiritual concerns, we are directly bringing about a change in the material world. You can like us on Facebook, and you can even get in touch. Thank you.